Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Amy controls a Henzie Torre. Sorry, but it's Torre from now on. And she wants to blitz in a hill giant. What happens? Alright, so I'm sure that everybody, when they heard this question, had a thought pop into their head about what they thought the answer should be. Of course, I also know that everybody has seen the thumbnail, so let's go through step by step very carefully and see if we can identify any potential issues. Alright, so the first step when you're casting a spell is to move it from whatever zone it is into the stack. And at that point, when it's on the stack, it's going to count as a spell. And so therefore, that's the point at which Henzie's ability is going to start applying to the hill giant. And so that means that the hill giant will have blitz. The rest of the process for casting the hill giant with blitz is going to be exactly the same as the process for casting any other spell that just has blitz normally. So we're going to skip through all the rest of those steps. In particular, let's note though that part of the process for casting a spell with blitz normally is going to involve setting up a triggered ability that makes you sacrifice it at end of turn. That's because the way that blitz is worded in the comprehensive rules makes this part of the blitz ability a part that happens while we're casting the spell. So that's something that's kind of interesting. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Now, after the spell has been cast, we're going to have that spell resolve and enter the battlefield. And here's where things are going to get a little interesting. So after the spell resolves and gets put onto the battlefield, we're going to notice that Henzie Torre is not going to be applying to it anymore. That's because the ability says that it only applies to creature spells. And after it leaves the stack, it's not going to be considered a spell anymore. It's going to be a creature permanent. So that means that the hill giant is just going to be a normal vanilla 3/3. Well, it wouldn't be a vanilla 3/3, right? I mean, it was cast using blitz, so that would mean that it should have haste and when this dies, draw a card. Right? Well, actually, here's where things are going to get a little bit awkward. So if you take a look at the comprehensive rules entry for blitz and take a look at specifically how the blitz ability gives those abilities to the creature, you'll notice something extremely unsettling. That is, the blitz ability is going to function to give those abilities to the creature while it's on the battlefield. In other words, the creature would need to have blitz while it's on the battlefield in order for it to get haste and when this dies, draw a card. Now, normally, when you're casting a normal spell that has blitz, if it has blitz printed right on the card, then that's not going to be an issue. It'll have blitz when it's a spell on the stack and also when it's on the battlefield. So all parts of the blitz ability will function exactly the way that they're supposed to. However, let's say that there was some way that you could cast a spell using blitz, and then, once it was on the battlefield, it wouldn't have blitz anymore. What kind of consequences might that have? And as you can see, we're going to get all of the drawbacks of blitz, but none of the benefits. That's because the thing that you need in order for it to get haste and when this dies draw a card would be the blitz ability on the battlefield. If the creature does not have blitz when it's on the battlefield, then it's not going to be getting any of those parts. However, as we mentioned earlier, the part that makes you sacrifice the blitz creature at end of turn, well, that's a triggered ability that gets set up when you cast a spell using its blitz cost. And so that means you would have to sacrifice the blitzed hill giant at end of turn. Really trippy, right? So that's the problem with the current wording on Henzie Torre and the comprehensive rules text for blitz. In order to fix this issue, we would need to change one or more of those things. So let's take a look and see if we might figure out some sort of a way that we could change the wording for blitz or change the wording on Henzie Torre that might make this card work a little bit more like it was intended to. So the first thing that I thought about was, well, maybe if we errated Henzie Torre, that could be the best way to go about this. And so what kind of errata would we need? The first thing that I thought about for that would be something that gave all of your creatures while they were on the battlefield blitz. And so that would work something like creatures you control have blitz also. You wouldn't even need the blitz cost. As long as it was already paid using blitz, then you don't really need to know what the blitz cost is, but you could put that part in there too, I guess. The problem with this is that it also reacts a little bit, well, not desirably, with cards such as Muruganda Petroglyphs. If you were to play the hill giant normally with the wording of Henzie Torre that I just proposed, then your hill giant would have blitz on the battlefield and it wouldn't be getting the bonus from Muruganda Petroglyphs, which is obviously not really what we want. So, well, okay, we could probably make these cards interact a little bit more sensibly and fix that issue if we were to do something else. Like, say, if we had the Henzie Torre go a little bit more precision in what creatures it was giving blitz. And it would only give blitz to the creatures that you were casting using blitz. So that would be another possibility. You could have some wording on Henzie Torre that said creatures you control that were cast using Blitz have this ability. Or, and even better yet, you could do something like, when you cast a creature this way, then it gains Blitz. And at first you might think that that one wouldn't work, because you're still giving the creature spell Blitz rather than giving the creature on the battlefield Blitz. But it turns out that that one actually would. And here's the reason why. So if you take a look at this rule in the comprehensive rules, normally when you have an object that moves from one zone to a different zone, then it's going to become a completely new object with no connection to its previous identity. And so this rule is actually one of the exceptions to that process. And specifically, it says that anytime you have a spell, activated ability, or triggered ability's effect change the characteristics of a spell on the stack, then that means when that spell turns into a permanent on the battlefield, then we're still going to have its characteristics change the same way. And so that means that if we had a triggered ability like the one that I proposed in the alternate wording for Henzie Torre that gave Blitz to the creature spell, well then the creature on the battlefield would still have Blitz even though it's a completely new object. And so I wanted to specially point out this rule here because a lot of the colleagues that I brought this situation to before I made this video actually specifically referenced this rule or some other corollary of it as one of the reasons why Henzie Torre might work. And it does sort of look like it should. However, if you read very carefully, you'll notice that the only things that we get to keep would be if we change the characteristics of the blitzed spell by a effect of a activated ability, triggered ability, or spell. Henzie Torre is not doing this with the wording that it currently has. It's changing the characteristics of the spell via a continuous effect that is from a static ability. And so that is, in fact, not covered under this exception. So that's the reason why this rule doesn't apply to Henzie Torre as worded and keep the Blitz ability on the card even after it's entered the battlefield. So those are a few ways that you might consider changing the wording on Henzie Torre in order to make the Blitz ability function a little bit more as intended. However, that's not our only option. We could also possibly change that rule that I just brought up, and I definitely would not want to do that. It is certainly possible that we could change Rule 400.7a to include the situation where you have a continuous effect that also changes the characteristics of a spell on the stack. But I feel like if we did that, there would be a lot of unintended consequences for a lot of different sorts of scenarios. And so I definitely would stay away from changing that rule in the CR. Okay, but that's not the only rule in the comprehensive rules that we could change, right? So we could also change the comprehensive rules involving Blitz, and I feel like that would be a lot cleaner way to do it. So as you noticed, the way that the creature gets the ability that makes you sacrifice it is actually slightly different from the way that the creature gets haste and when this dies, draw a card. So one other way that we could fix this issue would be if we had the creature with Blitz gain the haste and the draw card while it was a spell on the stack. Using that same rule that I just pulled up, 400.7a, we can see that if this happened as the result of a triggered ability that happened when you cast the Blitz spell this way, or as the result of a spell, such as the results of the resolving Blitz spell itself, well then you still would have access to those abilities while it was on the battlefield. So I feel like that would be a cleaner way to accomplish this than changing the Oracle text on Henzie Torre, but I'm still not convinced that this is the best way. And the reason is because that way we would not have the same correspondence between Blitz and Dash that we have currently. Blitz and Dash are very similar mechanics, and a lot of the same sorts of things that apply with Blitz apply also with Dash, which is already an established mechanic in Magic, and that also helps us to reduce the mental burden whenever we introduce these new keywords. If they're similar to something and work almost exactly the same as something that already exists, well then that wouldn't be that bad. It's not as hard to introduce something like that into the game than it is to introduce something that's pretty similar to something that already exists, but with a few key differences in some interactions. So we could change Blitz so that it gave the abilities of haste and when this dies, draw a card to the creature as part of the resolution of the Blitz spell. And that would work perfectly well as far as functioning goes, but we would lose this correspondence that we have with the Dash mechanic, and that's not necessarily ideal. Of course, we also could change the dash mechanic too, so that it worked exactly the same way, and that might or might not be a positive change depending on what other sorts of scenarios would be involved. One thing I can think that would be a reason why I would not want to do this would be because the dash mechanic, specifically in the card Ragavan, is actually pretty playable. And if you changed how that worked, then it might also change some interactions with the dash mechanic with other cards that are in the same format. Then players would have to know how they change those and take that into account in their gameplay. It's always really jarring as a player to realize that a card that you knew used to work one way, now it works a completely different way because they changed the rules, and maybe or maybe not you would have even known about that. So that's one of the potential drawbacks for changing it this way. I hope I've made it really clear in this video that I'm not trying to slam anybody at Wizards for having this card be worded the way that it is. As you could see, it's extremely complicated to introduce even one new mechanic in a way that makes sense and works perfectly the way you expect it to in all the different cases with all the thousands of Magic cards that are already in existence. If anything, I think that it's almost a miracle that this sort of thing doesn't happen more often. And if any of you are familiar with some other card games, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is a really interesting situation, and I think that it's also worth bearing in mind some of the stuff that we can do until or unless they fix it. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up would be this passage here from the MTR, which says that the head judge actually does have the authority to override the oracle text if a mistake is found. I'm not really sure I would feel comfortable using this power in an actual Magic tournament, but this is something that exists in the case that you might feel like it's warranted. In any case, I can definitely say that this is the closest that this line in the MTR has been to relevant since I started judging. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to cover here, which is maybe we don't really need to know too much about how we should handle this in tournament Magic play. That's because with this card, Henzie Torre, I think most of the application for it is going to be in a slightly different format. And, of course, I'm talking about Commander. Notice that with Commander, as long as we are not in some sort of a Magic tournament environment, we can literally do whatever we want. So if you just made a Henzie Torre deck, don't feel super bad and think that you have to tear it apart right away because your namesake card doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. As a matter of fact, it's extremely possible that you could just talk with the people in your playgroup and agree to play the card the way that everybody knows that it should function, at least until Wizards comes up with some sort of a way to make it so that it functions that way in normal gameplay also. This is a really awesome card, and I think it's a really interesting situation how the rules text of the card doesn't exactly match the functionality that we need for it to work the way that everybody thinks it should. This sort of example definitely is worth bearing in mind because Magic is super complicated, and anytime a new mechanic comes out, there's a risk that something like this might come up. I'm really glad to be in a game where they value having a consistent set of rules, and I'm very happy to say that all of the examples so far that I know of where something like this has happened have been corrected extremely quickly. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.